Imagine a world without weather apps, no hourly forecasts, no gentle alerts on your phone that snow is on the way. 100 years ago, in Britain, winter didn't send a notification. It simply arrived. At first, it would be a quiet whisper of cold, a sharper bite in the wind. Then, all at once, it would settle in, heavy, relentless, and unforgiving. Once winter took hold, it stayed. Today, we complain if the thermostat is a degree off. Back then, homes were cold by default. Not because something was broken, but because warmth was a luxury, something you had to earn every single day. Coal had to be carried in heavy buckets, fires had to be coaxed to life, and even then, the heat rarely reached beyond a single room. If you were lucky, the living room might be tolerable. But the bedrooms, the hallways, the kitchen, they were locked in a permanent, biting chill. Mornings didn't start with the gentle glow of a screen. They started with frost. On the inside of the windows, beautiful, intricate ice patterns would creep across the glass, a stark reminder of the cold that had invaded the house overnight. Any water left in a bowl would be frozen solid. Your own breath would hang in the air like a ghost as you dressed, pulling on layer after layer of wool and heavy cloth. Staying warm wasn't about fashion. It was about wearing practically everything you owned. The idea of central heating, of hot water on demand, was a dream for the wealthy. For ordinary people, it simply didn't exist. Hot water was a precious, rationed commodity. It meant boiling kettles on the stove or firing up a copper boiler, a slow, laborious process that took time and effort. A hot bath was a rare treat, not a daily routine. Outside, the world fell quiet. The usual hustle and bustle of the streets would fade. Not because people chose to stay indoors, but because getting anywhere was a battle. Roads were often unpaved, turning into a treacherous mix of mud, ice, and snow. They were obstacles, not pathways. Cars were still a novelty, a luxury for the few, and notoriously unreliable in the freezing temperatures. So, people walked. They walked everywhere, wrapped in coats and scarves that had been patched and repaired countless times. Boots, worn thin from constant use, were kept going because a new pair was an expense few could afford. Life slowed down. Shops might open late, or not at all, if a bad storm hit. Deliveries of food and supplies were delayed for days, sometimes weeks. News didn't travel at the speed of light. It traveled at the speed of a neighbor walking down the street, passed from one person to the next in hushed tones. For children, winter was a raw physical experience. They knew it not from a TV forecast, but through the ache of frozen fingers and the sting of red, raw cheeks. They walked to school in the pre-dawn darkness, arriving in classrooms heated by a single, overworked stove that barely took the edge off the freezing air. It was so cold that ink would freeze solid in the inkwells, and their hands would be too stiff and numb to write properly. Snow brought a flurry of excitement, a chance for play, but it also brought danger. Wet clothes from a snowball fight didn't go into a tumble dryer. They stayed wet, hanging in a cold room, taking days to dry. And with the damp and the cold came illness. Coughs and fevers were constant companions, lingering in houses where true warmth was just a memory. What did they eat? The winter diet was simple, often repetitive. It was built around what could be stored: root vegetables like potatoes, turnips, and carrots. There was bread, and if you were lucky, dripping to spread on it. Hearty soups were a staple, stretched with water and whatever was available to feed the whole family. Fresh fruit was an almost unheard of luxury. Meals were eaten quickly, huddled together before the food on the plate turned cold. Even the dinner table felt cold to the touch. Evenings were long, dark, and intensely quiet. The world was lit by the soft, flickering glow of gas lamps or candles, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. With nowhere to go and little to do, families gathered close. This wasn't just for sentimental reasons. It was a necessity. They huddled together to share body heat, to share stories, to share silence. Entertainment was what they made it. It was conversation, reading a book aloud by the fire, the rhythmic task of mending torn clothes, or simply listening to the howl of the wind as it rattled the doors and found its way through every tiny crack in the walls. This was a life that demanded resilience. It demanded patience, and more than anything, it demanded cooperation. Neighbors truly looked out for one another because they knew survival often depended on it. If a family ran out of coal, a neighbor would share theirs. A little food would be passed over the fence. Help was offered freely, without ceremony, because everyone was in the same boat. They were all enduring the same struggle against the elements. There was no escaping winter. You couldn't just turn up the heating or book a flight to a warmer climate. It was a force of nature that had to be faced head-on. But through this hardship, there was a deep, practical understanding of how to endure. It was a life lived day by day, fire by fire. They learned to find comfort in small things: a warm drink, a shared story, a brief moment of winter sun. And they waited, patiently, until slowly, almost without notice, the days would start to lengthen. The light would return, and the first hints of spring would begin to feel possible once again. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time interesting, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories from the past. See you next time.